Hey LPS students, so this video will cover the geometric area and specification exception assignment, and in this assignment we're going to use the code from geometric area and just add one specific class to it, that being the specific exception class. And what the specific exception class will do is it will create a object for an exception message. This will just be a string that says, error, you entered the wrong number of sides in the geometric area function. So specifically, we can read in the assignment, we're going to extend the geometric area program by writing an exception to handle user input where the parameters entered, so by parameters, I mean the number of sides and the values of each side, where if these parameters entered do not meet the specifications or if they don't make sense. So the example they give here is if you try to enter to calculate area for a polygon whose number of sides is 2. So if you think about it, there aren't any shapes in geometry that just have 2 sides. For the purpose of this program, we consider a circle to be either 0-sided or 1-sided. So next kind of shape we could do is triangle, which would be 3 sides, and then you'd have your squares and rectangles and rhombuses. But let's dive into this specification exception file. And we're going to begin to create a class for this kind of exception that we will call inside the geometric area file. And then we can test our exceptions, whether we're giving the right error messages, for example, in our main file in specification_test. So hopefully the purpose of this assignment is clear from just this introduction. So you'll want to download all these files and then open them in a text editor or the text editor provided on Bitbucket. So let's jump into the code. So if we look at the code that's provided, we have our geometric area and inside of here is the geometric area code from assignment number 6. So basically we have 3 functions, one that will calculate an area of 1 side, and then another where we'll provide 3 sides, and then finally one where we will calculate the area of something that's 4-sided. So our goal here is to basically, inside of each one of these functions, to write a condition where we will then call the specification exception class. So let's first, so we see at the bottom of geometricarea.cpp we have all 3 of these functions. So in the case of, let's just say, this first function where you're only passed a number of sides and then the value of 1 side, you either can calculate if this number of sides is 0, or if there's one, or in the else condition, it's assuming that there's just 1 side, and then you're calculating what would be the area of a circle. Really quickly, one thing that is an error in the starter code is we are missing brackets here. So you'll want to add those to your code. So let's tidy this up. And then this is where our else statement will be. Great. So one way we can throw an exception in this function is we'll make this an else if. And we can say else if the number of sides is equal to 1, we still want to calculate what would be the area of a circle. In the final condition, this third else, so if it's not zero-sided and it's not one-sided, then there must be an error. We shouldn't be calculating the area of a circle if we weren't provided with either 0 for num sides or 1. So this is now where we will call our specification exception. And how do we do that? Good question, and this will lead us into the specification exception header file. So this is where we will end up defining the class. We can see actually that the majority of it has been done for us. So we have the class specification exception, we have our private and public attributes. So every specification exception object will have a double value. So just we'll pass in some numerical amount for the value, and then it will have a string message. So what we'll want to do is we will want to jump into this is the constructor for this class. So this is what we'll build the unique exception objects, and we'll want to assign our string message to something. So this will be our error message. So we might say something like error cannot calculate the area of a polygon with, and then we'll need to specify how many sides the person put in when they got to that error condition. So what would be the number of sides that the user entered? In this case, it would be whatever they put in for num sides. So eventually, when we call our specification exception, we will pass in num sides. So for example, we'll call the constructor specification exception, and then we will pass in num sides. So num size is an int, yet the specification exception constructor in the code that was provided to you, it takes in a double. So we can do two things. We can either change this to an int, or we can cast this to be a double. So we'll say double num sides. Alrighty, and in this case, we will not return an area, so we can just return 0 if we're in the error condition. All right, so when we call the exception constructor, we pass in num sides. And so when we are writing our error message in the constructor for the specification exception class, we can use whatever this value we passed in was. So what we can type here is we're going to type what we assigned to this value variable. So we're going to want to say standard2 string, and then we'll pass in value. So this value was a double, and since we're going to output this string message to the console, we'll want to convert the double value to a string by using the toString method. And so error cannot calculate the area of a polygon with num sides. So it might say something like with 3, and then we'll put sides. Okay, so that's pretty much it for creating this specification exception class. Oh, sorry, we forgot to output the message. And we can do that in the constructor. We can say cancel out, and then we'll output that message. And we'll say end line. Great. So we'll save our specification exception class, and we'll continue to figure out how we want to throw exceptions in the other two functions. So great, just wanted to make sure that we have the specification exception header included in this file. And so now let's jump to getting the area with 3 sides. The second get area function. So when might we want to throw our exception in this get area function? So this get area function should only be calculating what appears to be the area of triangles, something with 3 sides. So basically, if the user puts in anything for number of sides that's not 3, we will throw our specification exception error. So let's just do this in terms of maybe an if-else kind of logic, where if it's anything, if number of sides is anything, if it's not 3, we'll throw the error, and then else we can just calculate this and return the area. Okay, so let's do that. So if num sides is not equal to 3, we should not be going through this calculation. So we will create a specification object, and we're going to pass in the num sides. So we can't, if the person passes in 4 for num sides and then tries to calculate a triangle, we will say, sorry, you can't calculate, error, you cannot calculate a polygon with 4 sides. And great. So, and then in this condition, we'll return 0. And then else, we can just go on with this calculation. Fantastic. So it looks like we have one more function to do, and that is for a polygon that has 4 sides. So essentially, it's the same deal. If in this case num sides is equal to anything but 4, we shouldn't go on with the calculations, and we should throw our error. So we just say if num sides is not equal to 4, then let's make that specification exception. Excellent. So if num sides is 4, then we can go into our calculation. Great. So we'll save our geometric area. And one thing, I want to jump back into the specification exception class. So when I was testing out my exceptions myself, I had to put standards in front of the string message and the cout, which was kind of bizarre since I included my IO stream and my string method, but just make sure that you include your standard : with the string and your standard cout message, and lastly your standard end line. So we'll have standard : here, there, on our toString method, and lastly when we declare the string message. Cool. And now we can go to the specification exception _test file. And what we'll do in this file is we will have our main function, and it will return 0 eventually. And your goal here is to test that all 3 functions are throwing exceptions correctly. And the way you can do that is by calling the getArea function. And for example, let's try to calculate getArea of num sides of 0 or 1, which is calculating a circle. So, for example, if we go to the getArea function, and in this case, we're going to test this first function, where we pass in a certain amount of num sides and then the value of one side as a float. So let's say I'm trying to calculate the area of a circle that has one of its sides is 20.0 units, but for some reason I put in, instead of a 0 or a 1, I put in a 2. So in this function, if we wrote this correctly, so if num sides is not either a 0 or a 1, we'll throw an exception object. So this should throw an exception that we made in this class, being this message that we output. Really quickly, I want to also include these include statements in our test file, and also we're going to want to include function declarations for the getArea functions, since we're not using a header file for the geometric area functions. So we'll put those in there. And now you should be able to just test all of the error messages for the other functions. So you'll need to test the getArea with, it takes in 3 sides. So you'll want to test it with passing in a value for num sides that's not equal to 3. And then when you're using 4 sides, you'll want to pass in a value for num sides that is not equal to 4 here in this section. So this will be in num sides with 3 side values. So that's calculating a triangle. And then getArea with num side getArea with 4 side values. So I wrote these comments kind of strangely. So I'll let everyone figure out how to test those functions themselves, but what you should expect is, for example, I will run let's get some test output. So let's do the getArea of, I ran this earlier with 3 instead of 2. You can keep 2 in there if you'd like, but so I'm going to compile the code. And then let's see what we get for output. So it says error, cannot calculate the size of a polygon with 3 sides. And that's because we converted it to we had a double value we converted it to a double here. So it shows, instead of 3, it shows 3.00000. So it looks like the exception class is working well for this function. So I'll let everyone else try it for the other two functions as well. So that's all we have for this video, and best of luck.